is a martial art that has existed for at least 2,000 years. It was born in the forests and temple courtyards of Kerala, in the far south of India. And it was old before the Shaolin monastery had laid its first stone. The man you're watching has performed it in over 25 countries. He has over 8 million followers on Instagram. He's been named amongst the most dangerous martial artists alive. And there's a reasonable chance that until this moment, you had never even heard of him. His name is Vidyut Jammwal, and what you're about to see is what it looks like when an extraordinary physical tradition meets a camera, and the world doesn't quite know what to make of it. This is 10 Point Fist, where we score the legends of action cinema, one fighter at a time. 6 categories, 10 points each, 60 total. The question is always the same. Who actually deserves to be here? Vidyut Jammwal was born to an Indian army family in 1980 in Jammu, the far north of India. Army families move. They uproot and replant on a timetable set by postings and transfers. And children raised in that life tend to develop a particular quality of adaptability, an ability to be anywhere. But one might argue that it also instills an innate desire to find a home, a place or position of permanence. And very early in his childhood, he found one, an ashram in Palakkad, in Kerala, run by his mother. That ashram taught Kalaripayattu. And for a child who had never been able to stay anywhere long enough to belong, here was something that would travel with him, a home he could carry in his body. If you've never encountered Kalaripayattu before, it's worth pausing here, because it changes everything about how you watch him. This isn't a gym discipline. It's not a competition sport. It's a traditional martial art, one of the oldest on earth, and it treats the human body as a philosophical project, as much as a physical one. Practitioners train in striking, grappling, weapons, acrobatics, and yoga simultaneously, each discipline reinforcing the other. And unlike many martial traditions that were codified and preserved as cultural artifacts, Kalaripayattu has remained a living practice, its techniques surviving through direct transmission from master to student across an unbroken chain of generations. Vidyut began that chain when he was 3 years old. His Bollywood debut came in 2011, in Force, playing the villain opposite John Abraham. It's worth dwelling on that word, villain. The performance works precisely because of it. As the antagonist, he is unencumbered by the requirements of heroism. He doesn't need to be likable or conflicted. He's simply a man of physicality, and the film lets that be enough. He ended up winning the Filmfare Award for Best Male Debut for his performance, and then, having demonstrated convincingly that he could command the screen without being its center, he made a decision that would quietly shape the next decade of his career. He stepped away from that kind of role entirely. The Commando franchise, which Vidyut has led through 3 installments beginning in 2013, is mid-tier commercial Bollywood action in its most straightforward sense. The plotting is questionable, the dialogue serves its purpose, and nothing more. And there is something revealing in his choice to anchor himself here, because what the franchise gives him is total control of the frame, at the cost of almost everything else. As the lead, he is the hero, the spectacle, and the moral compass simultaneously. It's an enormous amount of weight, for an action film especially, to distribute evenly. And these films don't always manage it. What they do manage, what they were clearly designed around, is giving him room to do things with his body that most directors never get to work with. In that narrow sense, the franchise does its job. The fights are good, the films around them are not. Junglee in 2019 is a more interesting case. Directed by Chuck Russell, the American filmmaker responsible for The Mask and Eraser. Okay! That is, a man who knows how to build an action sequence around a specific physical personality. Russell said publicly that he created the role specifically around Vidyut's Kalaripayattu. He wanted to showcase the art on screen in a way that Bollywood hadn't yet attempted. The result is imperfect, but it contains brief sequences that feel genuinely unlike anything in mainstream action cinema. Moments where the discipline's animal-inspired movements and its use of space come through with a real clarity. There's even a sequence involving elephants that's joyful in a way that commercial action films really rarely permit themselves to be. Khuda Hafiz in 2020 was his biggest commercial opening, a thriller built around a real-seeming emotional situation that asks more of him as an actor than the Commando films did. He mostly delivered. A sequel followed in 2022, to diminishing returns. The first film remains his most drastically substantial work, and outside of India, his least watched. And then in 2024, Crack, a film Vidyut also produced. It failed commercially and in ways that matter beyond the box office. Because a man producing his own vanity project before he has built the international platform to sustain that kind of ambition is making a structural mistake. To be clear, Crack is not the reason Vidyut Jammwal isn't a global star, but it is evidence that the path he's been on is not straightforwardly upward. Beyond these, his filmography contains a handful of films that broadly follow the same pattern. Action thrillers of varying ambition, the occasional puzzling detour into other genres entirely, and a consistent sense of a talent that hasn't yet found its definitive vehicle. Each one adds to the body of work without quite adding to a legacy. However, before the Commando franchise locked in his Bollywood persona, he made Tamil films in which he played supporting and antagonist roles. In those films, freed from the obligations of a protagonist, he becomes infinitely more watchable. It's the same dynamic that made Force work. When he's not required to be everything, he can be something specific. And specific is more interesting than everything.
Getting into Tamil Nadu is not easy, Chirag.
What makes the overall picture genuinely complicated, rather than simply frustrating, is what he's built alongside the films. His training videos on Instagram have accumulated tens of millions of views. He was the host of India's Ultimate Warrior on the Discovery Channel. But none of this translated directly into the international film career his talents suggest he should have. But it does represent something real. A man who has taken his discipline seriously enough that the world beyond cinema has noticed. In 2025, the phone rang. Legendary Pictures has cast him as Dhalsim in their upcoming live-action Street Fighter film. In terms of look and physicality, I cannot think of a person more perfectly suited for a role. Dhalsim is a yogi who fights to protect the home he loves. A man of deep spiritual discipline who is also genuinely dangerous. Kalaripayattu has always been yoga adjacent at its philosophical core. And whether this is the moment where everything changes, only time will tell. Let's get to scoring. Kalaripayattu does not issue black belts. There are no competition circuits, no ranking bodies, no championship records that translate into a number to point to. What exists instead is something harder to quantify. Direct transmission. A master who watched you train and decided, at some point, that you're genuinely good.
Black belt.
At this point, Vidyut has over 30 years of training. He's performed it in over 25 countries around the world. His Instagram training footage is watched by martial artists who don't even know about his movies. People who have no investment in his film career. They watch because what he does is a sort of physical madness. That's a meaningful form of peer review. The question this index always asks is whether the physical credentials are genuine, or whether a performance of physicality has been mistaken for the thing itself. With Vidyut, the credentials are not in question. The depth of training is real. The art is real. He is, on this measure, the genuine article. 8.5. Kalaripayattu was designed, at some level, to be witnessed. The animal forms, the lion, the elephant, the serpent, were always about more than combat efficiency. They were a form of physical storytelling. When Vidyut Jammwal moves through a fight sequence, this quality comes through in a way that is almost impossible to manufacture in a training room. It's a form that's unique in action cinema. Where the score cannot reach higher is partly the fault of the films, not the performer. The best choreographers in action cinema, the The people who have pushed the medium into genuinely new territory have never worked with them. The action sequences in the Commando films are well executed, but conservative, and sometimes even derivative. When the material has matched the talent, the results have been plain to see. There's simply just not enough of that material yet. For screen presence and choreography, Vidyut's getting a slightly generous 8. In Khuda Hafiz, Vidyut plays a man searching for his wife in a foreign country, a role that requires him to sustain something like genuine desperation across 2 hours of screen time. He manages it. He's not a formally trained actor, but he isn't completely limited as one either. In dialogue-heavy scenes, he's present. In moments of grief or urgency, he doesn't disappear into the action star, just waiting for the next fight while sleepily mumbling through his lines. What his filmography hasn't yet demanded is range, in the fullest sense. The kind of role that requires him to be funny, or morally compromised, or quietly devastated in a scene with no action at all. The Commando franchise has no interest in asking those questions of him. Sanak didn't either. As for Dhalsim in Street Fighter, I'd be honestly surprised if the role is meaty enough to change this score, even if I revisit it later. 6 out of 10. Vidyut's filmography is the most painful category to score, and it requires a particular kind of honesty. Not about him, but about the situation he's been placed in. Vidyut Jammwal does not have his raid. He does not have his own buck. He doesn't have a single film that functions internationally as a canonical entry point. You know, the one that people who care about action cinema send to people who don't yet know his name. The Commando franchise is moderately successful in India and essentially invisible elsewhere. Junglee reached a wider audience but didn't really break through. Khuda Hafiz is his most dramatically substantial film and the least seen internationally of anything he's ever made. The structural problem, and it is a structural problem, not a personal failure, is that Bollywood action films have historically not traveled the way of Hong Kong or Thai or Indonesian action cinema. The conventions are different, the pacing is different, the musical format, the different relationship between action and narrative, and the distribution challenges in Western markets. These aren't failures of individual films, but of an entire ecosystem that has not yet found its international bridge. Vidyut Jammwal is not the first gifted action star to be stranded on the wrong side of that gap, and he likely won't be the last. 5 out of 10. Within India, the legacy is real. He has brought Kalaripayattu to an audience that has never seen it performed at this level, and that matters. Not just in a commercially calculable way, but in a way that matters when a tradition that's been practiced in relative obscurity for centuries suddenly has a face that millions of people recognize.
Yeah,
Some South Indian shit. Don't even worry.
Kalaripayattu.
Yeah.
His training videos have given the art a global presence online, something it's never had before. There are young people that have looked up Kalaripayattu because of him. Internationally, the legacy is still in question. He is a name that some serious action cinema enthusiasts know and discussed with some genuine enthusiasm, but he is not yet a name that has shaped the conversation in the way that the transformative figures in the genre have shaped it. That may change. The Street Fighter film, if it performs, changes the calculation significantly. Not because a Hollywood supporting role automatically confers legacy, but because it's the first time his physicality would be presented to a global audience through a major studio platform, in a format that doesn't require the audience to seek him out. For legacy and influence, Vidyut Jammwal gets 5.5. There is a quality that some performers have, an X factor, a kind of magnetism, something that registers whether as personal charisma or as box office draw. Now, box office draw isn't something Vidyut Jammwal has accomplished yet, not even domestically to any major degree, but he has his own confident brand of star power, and that part is unmistakable. When he arrived on the set of Street Fighter, his co-star, Andrew Schultz, initially mistook his extravagant outfit for a costume. When producers later confirmed that was simply how he dresses, Schultz spent some time quietly reconsidering his assumptions.
I thought he was in costume. I didn't know. I didn't know that's just how he dressed regular.
And then Vidyut said, protein is a myth. Not that he, as a vegan, personally prefers plant-based nutrition. He said, protein, as a concept, is a myth.
Get that
God
motherfucker.
damn.
Jeez. He said he don't believe in protein.
Wait,
Really?
what?
Yeah, he don't believe in it. He goes, protein is a myth. I said, what?
Schultz describes him as hilarious, and that's maybe a little generous. I bring that up because there's something in that anecdote that is not entirely unlike what Kalaripayattu actually teaches. That the body, understood deeply enough, can operate according to principles that contradict otherwise received wisdom. Essentially, the idea that if you believe it, you can do it. He isn't necessarily wrong to believe that. The question is, how far beyond the mat is that conviction supposed to travel? Watch his training footage or his interviews without knowing who he is, without the context of his films, without the name, without the career. There's a good chance you'll keep watching. Whether that's because of the physicality or skill on display, or because you're not entirely sure what you're witnessing, is sometimes genuinely hard to say. For star power, 7.5. So let's take a look at how he did. Fighting pedigree, 8.5. Screen presence, 8. Acting range, 6. Filmography, 5. Legacy, 5.5. Star power, 7.5. That's a score of 40.5 out of 60, or 67.5%. 67.5% is a score that should feel higher than it does. And the reason it doesn't is worth sitting with, because it points to something real about how the international action cinema ecosystem works, and about what happens to certain kinds of talent when the system doesn't have a ready category for them. Part of the answer is structural, and not his fault. Vidyut Jammwal entered the nepotism-heavy film industry without family connections, without production house relationships or the inherited credibility that many Bollywood stars begin with. He was, in the most literal sense, an outsider, meaning he had to work considerably harder than his peers simply to get into the room, let alone to create a home for himself in that space. That home being the center of the frame. That's not something that's easy to give up, even when giving it up might be the thing that saves you. This context matters when you start tallying his decisions. A man who has fought for every role, every franchise, every inch of screen time is not going to find it easy to accept a smaller chair once he's finally earned a seat at the table. The instinct to protect his position, to be the lead, to control the frame, to produce his own material, it's less difficult to understand when you know what it took to get there. But there's a third dimension to this, and it's the hardest one to articulate without sounding unkind. In a Film Companion interview, asked how he differentiates himself from other actors, he replied,
"All the gentlemen you've referred to are great action stars, but I'm the top martial artist in the world officially."
He said it without irony, without qualification, without any apparent awareness of how it landed. And the word that stayed with me was not top or world, it was officially. As though there is some governing body somewhere that's assessed every martial artist on earth and then issued him a certificate.
We of the Kokurukai salute you.
That doesn't exist. What does exist is a man who's trained in one of the world's most demanding physical traditions since the age of 3. A tradition that demands, as a prerequisite for mastery, an absolute and unwavering belief in oneself. Kalaripayattu, it appears, does not produce people who hedge their assessments. And it may be that the very quality that made him so incredible as a practitioner has made him, in other contexts, difficult. That would be the sad version of the story. A man so thoroughly formed by his art that he cannot separate his confidence in the practice from his confidence in himself, and cannot separate his confidence in himself from a belief that the world simply hasn't caught up yet. It would explain the insistence on lead roles, the vanity project, and the protein thing. It would also be, if true, a genuinely sad irony that the discipline which gave him everything may in the end be the thing standing between him and the career he should have had. Street Fighter is a different kind of opportunity, precisely because it asks him to do the one thing his career has most resisted: to show up somewhere he doesn't control, in a role that isn't his, and make it matter anyway. 67.5% is a score that tells you a great deal about the films he's made, and less about what he's capable of. And perhaps something too about the distance between those two things, and how much of that distance was always within his power to close. That places Vidyut Jammwal at the top of the 10-point fist index. For now. Because he's the only one there. Every entry that follows will challenge his position, and some of them will do it convincingly. Now, you tell me, is 67.5 the right number? Is the filmography score too harsh? Or not harsh enough? Am I being too hard on his career choices? Or am I being a little too easy? This index exists to be argued with. And the best arguments will shape how I score the people who come after him. Subscribe if you want to be here for the rest of the list. And if you know someone who has spent their whole life watching action films and somehow never encountered Vidyut Jammwal, send them this video. They have some catching up to do.